for the Orlando office of Brennan, Manna, and Diamond. I'm also on our firm's executive leadership team and our Empowerment and Opportunity Committee. I want to welcome everyone today, and particularly all of our esteemed members of the judiciary in Central Florida. Thank you for joining us and offering your time to share your perspective and thoughts today in order to celebrate our Asian Heritage Month. One thing I would tell you is that I'm proud of our judges who are participating because on reflection with my other colleagues, Stephen Chung and Jessica Chiu from the Orlando office, we were just remarking as to back in 1995 when we had less than a handful of Asian American attorneys who were practicing in the Central Florida area. And at some point we did help to start the GOABA organization, which is an affiliate of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. That was back in 2009. We're glad to report that now we have over 65 members going strong. So again, very excited of the growth that we have in Central Florida as far as the AAPI attorneys are concerned. So with that, I don't want to take time from the judges. With that, I will let Jessica introduce each of the judges, and we will start with the program.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jessica Chiu. I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We can start with Judge Grace Robson. The Honorable Grace Robson is a United States bankruptcy judge in the Orlando Division of the Middle District of Florida. She's board certified bankruptcy attorney with over 20 years of experience. Before joining the bench, she practiced corporate reorganization and bankruptcy, debtor-creditor relations, and bankruptcy litigation. She represented corporate debtors, trade and institutional creditors, trustees, receivers, and creditors committees. Judge Robson has been involved in all facets of reorganization-related representation, including pre-filing consultation, filing complex corporate bankruptcy cases, post-bankruptcy financing, asset purchase agreements, as well as routine matters. She's an active member of the American Bar Association and currently serves as co-chair of the Secured Creditors Subcommittee of the Business Law Section, Business Bankruptcy Committee, and previously served as co-chair of the Pro Bono Services Committee. Before relocating to the Middle District of Florida, she served on the board of directors of the Bankruptcy Bar Association for the Southern District of Florida and was the Broward chair of the Pro Bono Committee, the Broward chair of the CARE Program Committee, and chair of the Wellness Committee. We also have with us today the Honorable Denise Kim Beamer. She was appointed to the Florida Ninth Circuit Court in 2019. Judge Beamer has been a Florida public servant, starting her career in the 11th Circuit as an assistant state attorney, then became a senior assistant attorney general in the Consumer Protection Division of the Florida Office of the Attorney General. Judge Beamer is the first Korean American circuit judge in the state of Florida. She's involved within her community and an active member of the Orange County Bar Association, the Young Lawyer Section, Greater Orlando American Bar Association, and coach mock trial at Berry Law School here in Orlando. Judge Beamer is a first-generation Korean American, and she is very proud of the sacrifices made by her hardworking parents. She hopes to instill those same values and work ethics in her children and is happily married to the Honorable John Beamer, who she met while competing on Berry's renowned trial team. With us is also Judge Vincent Chiu. He is tied up a little bit right now in trial, but he will be joining us as soon as he's able. Judge Chiu was appointed to the Florida Ninth Circuit bench in 2019 and won election in 2022. He's currently presiding in the Circuit Civil Division, and prior to his assignment in civil, he served for 2 years in the Family Division. Before taking the bench, he served served for over 11 years as an assistant United States attorney for the Middle District of Florida. In that capacity, he concluded over 40 jury trials and handled a variety of cases involving counterterrorism, hate crimes, sex crimes, and complex fraud. He also worked on the Pulse investigation and led an internal investigation into threats against Jewish community centers and schools. He lives with his wife, Alicia, also an attorney, and their 3 children in downtown Orlando. Our final and definitely not least is our first Asian American judge with the former 5th District Court of Appeals, well, within the former 5th District Court of Appeals, which is the Honorable Judge Jeanette Bigney. Judge Bigney was appointed to the Orange County Court in 2012. She's a first-generation American and the first attorney in her family. Her parents immigrated from the Philippines to Chicago, Illinois, and she's active in the local bar associations, the Florida Bar, Orange County Bar Foundation, court organizations, and most importantly, with this being Florida, she sits on the Orange County Supervisor of Elections Canvassing Board since 2012, which of course includes the 2020 Biden versus Trump election. Judge Bigney has spent her entire professional career here in Orlando, where she's truly an integrated American with her spouse, David, who is a local attorney, her 2 children, Justin and Jaden, and 2 dogs. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll hope Judge Chiu can join us in a few minutes. So let's start with you, Judge Robson, if we could. How do you identify with the Asian American Pacific Islander community?
So I guess how I would answer this question is that I think that I'm also a first generation Korean heritage. And I think how I identify is that I think a lot of us come from similar immigrant backgrounds from just what I'm hearing from this panel. I was, like I said, a first generation born here in the US. I think a lot of our parents were or are small business owners, and that required the children to kind of be able to be more independent, being able to take care of ourselves, our siblings, and also requiring us to have some level of self-sufficiency, as well as in some cases, maybe serve as translators for our parents. So I think, I identify with a lot of other people who are in similar circumstances. And I think, number one, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I think it's a really important conversation. It's growing up, I didn't have other people that were in similar circumstances. So to have people here who I've met, obviously, as I've aged in the profession and the like, it's really a good thing to be able to talk to people who have similar backgrounds, share experiences, and maybe educate others as well. So,
do you have any comments with that, Judge Beamer? Also, first Korean American judge.
Yeah. So first, I ran out of the house, so this robe is my way of covering up the fact that I'm not in a suit, and this is how I conduct my civil hearings. But no, thank you so much. This is such an honor to be on this panel with the other folks. When I was growing up, I didn't know any lawyers. I definitely did not know any judges. My parents immigrated from South Korea, and they opened a dry cleaning store in West Palm Beach, Florida. There are like 10 Korean people in West Palm Beach, Florida. I mean, I jokingly say that, but the only attorney I ever met was the one dropping off their dry cleaning at the store when I was working there. And that was my only connection into the legal field. But it really was my father's encouragement to do law, and I resisted it for a long time. But, it just became a natural fit because I did have to translate for them. I filled out my own FAFSA form and applied for college. I helped them. They would get sued occasionally, and I would have to look at it. And I didn't know what I was looking at the time, but it was something that was definitely interesting. But I was born in America. So when I went to school, I was an American. And when I walked into my house, I was Korean. My parents would speak to me in Korean. I would answer them in English. And then in the summer times, they would ship me off to Korea. And we would stay with relatives and then come back. So, it was just looking back, it was, now it's just an incredible blend. My husband is not Korean. He is born and raised in Tennessee, Florida. So my daughter was born during the Florida Gator Tennessee Vols football game. So she identifies as half Korean, half Tennessean. So it really just depends. But you know, I'm proud to be Korean. I'm proud to be American. I think I'm just a perfect blend of both. And also, you know, we have so many things that identify us as having parents from different places, but growing up in America. And I think it just makes us able to understand others and, you know, and understand that not everyone comes from the same background.
Judge Bigney, what about you? How do you identify with the Asian American Pacific Islander community?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having us and creating this panel. But I want to echo what Judge Robson said. My parents immigrated to the Philippines and they started off with a small business. During your introduction, you mentioned that my mom came over on a nursing visa. When my dad came over eventually, he came in as a bookkeeper, accountant, and eventually became a CPA. But my first contact with any lawyers was when they were trying to go through the naturalization process of becoming citizens. And then when my father opened a small business, which has gotten bigger over the decades, he's had a lot of contact with lawyers. So, you know, he would take me to his meetings. And of course, it was all over my head. I was, I think, a sophomore in high school when this process started, but it was so fascinating. And we didn't have Google back then, but I remember like going to a world book and trying to find what things meant because I would hear a few words. And of course, it's not in the World Book Encyclopedia. But, you know, you're also talking about language. I never learned Tagalog, which is the language that they speak in the Philippines. And I remember when I was younger, overhearing a conversation that my parents had with their fellow Filipino friends and talking about kids with accents. And my mom, since she immigrated over as a nurse, when she would speak to some of the doctors who didn't have an accent, they were very American, she had heard some of the doctors comment about, you know, these Filipino nurses with their accents and maybe, you know, it made it more difficult to understand them. And my mom felt very strongly about me being as American as possible because she was so proud that she worked her way over to the US that she did not teach me Tagalog. So it's something I wish I knew because there's so many similarities with other languages.
Yeah, that is an interesting point and a nice commonality that you all had with the language issues, because of course that is an entry issue for a lot of immigrants coming into the United States. Now, what about you, Judge Beamer? How did you find your way to the judiciary, and did your heritage influence the decision? I know you touched a little bit on that in our last question, but do you have anything else you want to add?
Sure. I mean, you know, this is such a stereotype, but it really did happen. My dad said you can be a doctor or a lawyer. And that's what he constantly told me when I was growing up, you know, and I, you know, like I said before, I resisted it a lot, but, you know, having done debate and in high school and then college, and then sort of, I think the legal field just naturally came to me. And it was really, you know, my parents occasionally would get sued in small claims court. And so they had no idea what the process was. So I had to kind of look at, you know, what is this? What does it mean? And they didn't always have the resources to hire legal counsel. So they kind of had to fumble through it on their own. And, you know, and I had a lot of empathy for people like that. But I eventually, you know, went to law school and then worked my way through. I was an attorney. I never thought being a judge was even a possibility, right? Because at that time, a lot of the judges they did not look like me, that, you know, I didn't have a connection to it. But it was a boss. I was working at the Attorney General's office and my boss was going through the appointment process. And she said, and I got to see firsthand of what she was going through and how that process went. And then she said, you should try too. And you know, we went through the process and ultimately I was appointed in 2019 and it's been such an honor. And when the Korean newspaper published, you know, an article with me as, you know, a judge, And then my parents' names were in it. Oh my goodness. They like framed it. They tell everybody like it's the traditional, you know, Korean story. He's so proud of it. He was just in Korea and that was a thing. So, you know, I'm so happy to make them happy. And it really does. It's just the best feeling, honestly, in the world, because they worked so hard. They worked so hard just to provide everything that we needed. And so I'm just thankful to give back. Now they're living with us. And so that's been a lot of fun. And that's something new and different, especially with the kids. But yeah, that's ultimately how I made my way onto the bench. And also, you know, Judge Bigney was on the bench too. And I looked at her as a role model as well. I don't think she knew at the time, but I thought, you know, I saw her, I could identify with her. I became friends with Judge Bigney before I came on the bench, and she was really encouraging too. So that's just, I'm so grateful to Judge Bigney for that. And I was so grateful to meet Judge Robson as well when she became the bankruptcy judge.
Awesome. That's really nice though, too, that you've had the camaraderie before you started and now you're sitting together. What about you, Judge Bigney? How did you find your way to the judiciary and your heritage influence?
So I was a prosecutor, and when you're a prosecutor, you have so much time in court. And after I left the state attorney's office, I did insurance defense work, and I was all over Florida. I mean, I joke that I spent half my pregnancy in a car because I was driving either to the West Coast or up to Jacksonville or South Florida. But I had a very good rapport with some judges, and they would encourage me, and they're like, oh, do you ever want to be a judge? And I really didn't think about it because I didn't see judges like me. I mean, I remember watching the O.J. Simpson trial in, I think it was 1995 or 96. And Judge Ito, I was like, oh, he's an Asian judge. And of course, in California, they have a very high Asian population, and the growth of the Asian population there. So seeing that, it didn't occur to me, but with the encouragement of judges, men and women, and just watching, I'm also considering the Ninth Circuit and how many female judges we have and the age. But I remember going through the appointment process, and I was shortlisted twice. And one of the last questions during my first interview, I think that was the end of 2010, was, well, how many Asian judges are there? I had no clue. So of course, when I had my second interview, I bogged myself down for days looking at different circuit websites, and sometimes there were pictures, and you just can't assume somebody's Asian by a name, and oftentimes female took their husband's name, so I didn't know. But I came up with a number, and sure enough, it was a question. And I'm forever thankful to the voluntary bar associations, and especially GoABA, which was at its inception when I became a judge still, or just, it wasn't as big as it was. So I'm just thankful for all that support and encouragement, and it's given me a good pathway to the bench.
And what about you, Judge Robson? How did your heritage influence your path to the bench?
Okay, so I would say a couple of things. So first, the part of my heritage that influenced me was my dad's life experience. So he immigrated from Korea, but his family, and he was born, and some of the families still are there, or I don't know what's going on, but they from North Korea. So so he literally was fleeing when the communists came in the early 50s, and he was like, was in a cave for periods of time. There was it was obviously very traumatic. Yeah. And so number one, he still talks about it, now. And so it's influential in how I think about and appreciate the United States, our system of government, and the rule of law. And, so tying on to that, it's, another way that the heritage influenced my decision to seek a judgeship was my desire to treat people based on, the merits versus how people looked, where they're from, their financial circumstances. Because, even though, they immigrated and they, did okay for themselves, it certainly wasn't a moneyed position, right? They both came over. My mom was also on a nursing visa. She came actually through Canada, and they also opened a dry cleaning store in, in New York. But, we're just like blue collar, I would say low to middle income family. And so I became fascinated with criminal justice, and I wanted to become a judge because I appreciated the power and influence that the position grants you. And I say that in the way that, not that I wanted power and influence, but because I would want someone in that kind of position who would think about and treat people impartially. And that's kind of one of the drivers for why I wanted to do this.
Yeah, that's very important. Judge Bigney, can you tell us what is or was the most singular, significant, or important work you have performed to date in the legal field, whether it was as an attorney or as a judge?
So as a county court judge, one of the opportunities you have is to sit on the elections canvassing board. And yes, you talked about the Trump-Biden election, but I was also there and I was chairing during the recount. And on a personal note, usually canvassing it over the course of the elections week, it takes maybe an additional 10 hours. But that week, I think we were there until past midnight. I still had 2 kids at home who were in high school, and my husband happened to be out of town for a night. So it was a debacle, but it was physically and emotionally challenging because it was a highly contested race. There were attorneys from the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the candidates, plus just people who were watching and criticizing. So you were on. I mean, it was being recorded, it was being broadcasted. And even though I would come home at midnight, I had a docket at 9 o'clock in the morning. So it tried me mentally and physically, but that was the most challenging thing. However, I'm very proud of the work that all these supervisors of elections and canvassing boards do. And I'm just really impressed with the voters and the respect for the process of being able to be a citizen and vote.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you are on that, because as a citizen of Orange County, I like the fact that we do have an Asian member of our group on there. So thanks for that work. What about you, Judge Robson? What is significant or important in your legal career?
So I would say, as a practitioner, what I think was the most important work that I did was helping people get free from or reorganize their debts, helping them preserve their homes and their businesses. That's where I felt I had the most impact. And then as a judge, I think making sure pro se litigants understand the proceedings that they're there for, and the reason why behind rulings, because, most people who are certainly those who are representing themselves don't know the process. They don't really know, they may not even know what's really going on and whether what they're hearing is appropriate and whether another side may be taking advantage. So I think I don't know about the Ninth Circuit courts, but certainly the federal courts in Orlando and Middle District generally have one of the highest volumes of pro se filers. So I think it's really important in this role to make sure that those folks understand what's happening.
That's very important. What about you, Judge Beamer? What do you feel was significant or important in your legal career?
So when I was an attorney at the Office of the Attorney General, I was in the Consumer Protection Division. So we would often investigate businesses for deceptive and unfair trade practices. Somehow I started looking at they were really criminal organizations, but I was in the civil division. So we tracked down those folks that sent robocalls, those robocalls to senior citizens and veterans, and they would get vulnerable elderly people on the phone. They would pretend to talk to them and care for them and give them special attention, and then eventually take their money and not provide any services. So we were able to partner with the Federal Trade Commission, go into federal court, get ex parte injunctions, and litigate and try and get restitution to some of these victims. And they range from sophisticated lawyers and doctors who would tell me, I can't believe I just got ripped off, to, vulnerable people that English wasn't their first language, but I was able to, I could always listen to them and empathize. But, as a judge, I echo Judge Robson. growing up, I would constantly have to translate things to my parents in a way they could understand in English, right? So one day I was a prosecutor and I got JO8 and I was sad, meaning a directed verdict was granted in trial, and the trial stopped. And my dad was like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, I got JO8, the case ended." And I said, "Dad, remember when we used to play soccer and the other side would score 10 goals and the game just stopped and we went home?" I'm like, "Dad, that's what happened to me today." And he was like, "I'm
Oh,
sorry,
no.
I'm so sorry," But I think that that's a skill as a judge that I can break down and really explain, because in circuit civil, we do have a lot of pro se individuals that are very vigilant about their case, and they just want to vent sometimes and they just want to be heard, and I listen, and then ultimately I say, "Yeah, I can't do that," or "Yeah, I can," or no, I give them time, I give them the space, but ultimately I have to balance that with the merits of the case, and I'm firm with how I rule and explain, but at the very least they know why I did what I did. But that's important to me. I think growing up the way I did, that gives me that special skill, because sometimes I remember being an attorney and not always understanding why the judge ruled the way they did, and I was an attorney. So I think that's really important.
Yes, it is. Judge Robson, let's find out what brings you joy about your heritage and culture.
So I would say, in thinking about this, I would say like the seasonal foods, because here in Florida, there's wet season and dry season, but I grew up in the Northeast, and I just feel like those seasonal foods like evoke memories for me of like family gatherings. So like in the winter you'd have like certain things, and in the summer you'd have others. Yeah, I don't know. So to me, that's part of the joy of my culture. It's just the
Definitely.
gatherings around food.
Definitely. What about you, Judge Bigney?
So one of the things that brings me great joy is I'm Filipino, and I'm meeting different people from different Asian cultures. And I love learning the differences and the similarities. I just as Judge Robson said, it is so strange, but we seem to we seem to focus on food and our like for it. I mean, and the number of like for Go ABBA, the number of things where we do it involving food or planning a menu. Like for instance, on Shanto An, she is on a foundation with me. For those of you who are familiar with her, and at our retreat, I thought, since she was the outgoing president, it was really important to have something, because it's so important to her that we have some food that had some kind of Asian flair. The main menu was barbecue, but I ended up selecting a tiramisu ube cake, and everybody else is like, "What's ube?" And I'm like, "It's like a root." But it was also neat to introduce and share the different foods with people who are unfamiliar with Asian foods, besides going to like a noodle place like our local places around here.
Yeah. Judge Beamer, food as well?
That's how my mom shows love.
It's a love language. Total love language.
So, it's funny. My husband comes home and he'll tell me a story about his interaction with my mom. And my mom said, "Hey, John, my husband, do you want some apples?" And he'll say, "No, thank you." And she's like, "Are you sure you don't want any apples? I'll cut them up for you." He's like, No, I'm okay. I'm just going to go take a shower." And then he comes back out and finds a plate with sliced apples, on the table. And then he eats them and enjoys them. And so I think food is just how my mom shows love. Now my mom cooks his favorite Korean food and not mine. That's annoying, but fine. I get it. No, but I mean, for the joy is really sharing it with my children. Also, my kids are 7, almost 5 and almost 3. And so they're at this age where they're just fascinated. And my parents bring back the traditional Korean hanbok, the outfits, they get to wear them. One of the traditions is giving the boys, their grandson, gold rings. So they just came back from Korea and they present these tiny gold rings to my 5-year-old and my 2-year-old. And I'm just watching, and they put it on and they start running away. And I'm just like so afraid it's going to get lost and, whatever, but they loved it. And my son says, "I'm married," and because he doesn't really understand. But I just love sharing all of the Korean culture and the heritage. It's just so fun. It's new, it's different, and it's new, and it does bring me joy.
Well, my
Awesome.
parents never gave my boys any gold rings. I'm gonna have to bring that up the next time I speak to.
Ask them about it.
Chinese tradition. I got gold when I got married. People would come up and just put gold on you. And you're like, oh, thanks. But anyway, that's so funny. Okay, what about family traditions? Judge Beamer?
I think one of them is, you know, my parents are pretty traditional in some ways and not in other ways, right? Because they become Americanized, they've been here. But one thing my parents do really focus on is the traditional Korean Thanksgiving and the food and the duck, which is like the rice cakes, like making those rice cakes and then dressing us up in our Korean outfits and bowing to show respect to my parents, and then my parents give the kids money. So this is something that we do every year, which is nice. I used to get annoyed as a kid, but now the kids are into it. And so that's something we definitely do. And a special soup for my birthday, or you know, in New Year's also.
Yeah, I do like those rice cakes.
I'm sorry, you froze, or is that me?
Uh-oh.
Judge Chiu, thank you for joining us. We that you are in trial this, right? Am I frozen? I think I'm unfrozen. Yes. Hello.
You're unfrozen.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry. I was welcoming Judge Chiu, who has joined us. We apologize. He was in trial, as we explained. So we're going to have you jump right into this. So what's your favorite holiday, important family tradition?
Oh, okay. And sorry, I'm working on getting my camera and everything up, so
All good.
I'll try to appear shortly. You know, honestly, full disclosure is that I really don't feel like we had that as a kid growing up. I mean, my parents both worked in the restaurant industry, and you know, I mean, Thanksgiving, I
What
guess,
about you,
was a
Judge
big
Bigney?
deal for us. Not for any
Favorite
culturally
family
significant.
traditions?
So, but being Filipino, there's a lot of Catholic influence in the Philippines. So Christmas was just such a joyous occasion, and we would celebrate very traditionally. We would go to midnight mass, we'd wake up in the morning and open presents. But one of the things my parents really, I mean, I could see how much it meant to them, was on Christmas, and with the time change between Chicago and the Philippines, we would arrange for a phone call to the Philippines. My grandparents didn't have phones in the Philippines, so they would make arrangements to go to somebody's house who had a phone, and we would do this call. This is back in the 70s and 80s. So I thought that was like really neat and just eye-opening, and how different things were in the United States versus the Philippines. But and I think that for those of you who've heard me speak on panels before, when my mom was a nurse, she befriended one of her patients, and it was an Italian woman who's my godmother, my Aunt Jean. And Aunt Jean said, hey, you know, I have an apartment, you're pregnant, you and your husband should move in. And because I didn't have any Filipino family here, I had this Italian family, and they were very, very big on Thanksgiving. And it's still something I carry on today. And as we said, like, food is my love language. I just love to cook. I love to have an open house for Thanksgiving, and I love to celebrate Christmas.
Awesome. And Judge Chiu, I apologize. I had a little tech difficulty. Did I accidentally cut you off, or were you finished with your response? I had thought you were done, but I'm not certain.
I think the tech issues on my end, but
Okay.
I don't know. When I was growing up, Thanksgiving was a big deal, because not for any like culturally significant reason, but because my parents were in the restaurant business. My relatives were all in the restaurant business, and it was the only day we had off. So Thanksgiving actually became our big celebration, because that was, you know, so it's kind of like, you know, we sort of created what we could out of what we were able to.
Yes. What about you, Judge Robson?
I was going to say the same as Judge Chiu, which is, I think I shared some of the same customs, I guess, as Judge Beamer, with respect to the certain foods at certain times of year, or after having a baby, you get the soup. On your birthday, you get the soup, and New Year's, you get the soup. But along the lines of what Judge Chiu was saying, which is because my parents owned that business that was open basically 6 days a week. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Day were really the only days, other than, 4th of July, those things were the only days they had off. And so during the family gathering holidays, we would bake, cook, eat, and get together. So those were kind of the family traditions I'd say I carried over. And I also was annoyed with the bowing thing, but I think it made it better that we got money. So I think that, I was more okay with it.
Judge Beamer,
Oh, yeah.
do you have anything you want to add?
Oh, no, I'm okay.
You're good. Okay. So the question I always dislike in terms of ethnic heritage is where you're from. Do you have any other pet peeves on those, or is it just me? Because it feels also, it's multi-dimensional as to how or what is implied or how you should answer that question. But with regard to ethnicity or heritage, is there anything that you're asked that you really dislike? And let's go ahead and start with you, Judge Chiu, since you're just joining us.
Yeah, I feel like I get asked a lot of things. There's the where are you from, the question, and then there's like the inevitable, well, where are you from? When the answer is New Jersey or Philadelphia or whatever. But at this point, I just sort of go with the flow.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
That's the exact same thought I had, which is the question I dislike the most is where are you from? And then the second is, no, where are you from? It's like repeated.
Can they say it louder to you?
Yeah, like no, from, where are you from? So so I think there has been some progress societally on that a little bit, or maybe it's just when people were younger, that's kind of how they wanted to ask questions. But I feel that now that K-pop is such a big part of the younger culture, which I'm not, not aware of, but like I know that it's a big thing. It's kind of like now people realize there's more than just one kind of Asian person. Asia is a big area. It's quite large, and like it covers like a lot of places. There's not only one country in Asia. So that was kind of the thing that used to bother me the most.
Does anybody else want to comment on that? No? Okay. Judge Bigney, why don't you tell us who your role models or mentors are and how they've influenced or guided you?
So my parents are definitely my role models. I mean, just watching how hard they work and the sacrifices they made and the distance and the years that they've been separated from their family. It just really laid a good foundation of work, and seeing them being discriminated against and how they handled it with grace taught me to be tough and resilient. So of course, they're my first and primary role models. But when I took the bench, Judge Nancy Clark was here for me, and Judge Belvin Perry. So I really thank them for just keeping me grounded and making me realize there's so much in life then this is a job, and the job was going to be here, but to like take care of myself and take care of my family, and just to especially Judge Perry, he encouraged me early on, and I'm reflecting upon a certain incident. Shortly after I took the bench, I was in a bad car accident, and I remember it was an election year and trying to push myself to get back into work, and you didn't really want to see Judge Perry because he was kind of scary, but he came down into my office and he said, your kids are young, you're young, you got to take care of yourself. And he said, everything will be fine. He said, trust me, trust yourself. He's like, you're doing a good job. Everything will be fine. And to have that kind of encouragement. And when I took the bench, I mean, right now we have a good awareness for self-care and your wellness. But back then I put so much pressure on myself, and to hear that from our chief judge really alleviated a lot of things and helped me be a better person, helped me be a better parent, and helped me be a better jurist.
Yeah. Judge Robson, do you have any comments on that in terms of role models?
No, I mean, I think it's similar in the sense of, as Judge Bigney said, the first role models are your parents, even though you weren't thinking of it that way, or I wasn't thinking of it that way. I think just demonstrating how they, like I said earlier, they worked 6 days a week. They really took no time off. We had no family vacations, none of that. And I think when I was younger, I kind of was like, oh, well, I see other people, they go on vacations and do these things, but my parents were always working. But in retrospect, it makes me appreciate how much they put into, giving a life for their kids. So that's, on the upbringing side. And then on the professional side, I would say there were a number of practitioners who I looked up to and considered them mentors, even though they didn't know I was considering them my mentors. So it's people who really did what I thought was like top-notch legal work, as well as took interest in younger attorneys and fostering the interest in the practice of law and getting before the courts or whatever area a young lawyer may want to pursue. But I always admired people who did both.
Yeah. Judge Beamer, do you have any role models to
Yeah,
add?
I echo similarly with Judge Bigney and Judge Robson. Definitely my parents, we never went on vacation either. Maybe the occasional trip, like a road trip that we did. And then, they never came to our after school extracurricular activities. I have maybe one memory of a soccer game that my dad came to, but everything else they did not. But I knew it was because they were working. And now my kids beg me to go to stuff, and I'm like, oh, let me see if I can reschedule or get there. But no, I really appreciate my parents. They're definitely role models. When I pick up and move to a foreign country where I am not 100% well versed in their language and start a business and raise my family there, do I have that bravery, and courage to do that? I don't know. So I really, looking back, appreciate that. And then I think depending on what the issue is, I think the mentors vary. If I need help with being a working mom and trying to balance everything at home and my kids and my family, there are certain people I look to. If it's how do I deal with a difficult attorney while being a judge, there are different judges that I, will go to and ask questions. So I think mentorship is so important, and just having that person to go to is incredible.
Judge Chiu, do you have any role models that you'd like to add?
I mean, I think I'd echo, some of what the other folks have said. I mean, certainly my dad, because of the, there's a certain like laconic nature to being sort of like the immigrant dad, where there's a lot of things that first world problems that bother other people that you just kind of shrug off. And I think in hindsight, looking back at the things that where we would call them his challenges or hardships, and he would just sort of be like, it's just the way it is, and you just go. And I think that probably something I've borrowed a lot from. But also, the other judges that I've appeared in front of in the past of really, I had the benefit of practicing in front of a lot of our federal judges for a lot of years. So, in particular, like Judge Antone, John Antone, who really took a lot of pride and put a lot of thought into the art of judging. I remember the first time I got put on the bench. I mean, he took me out to lunch and talked to me about everything from judging to like how to not overeat at all of the judge events. So, and I think that did a lot for me to have somebody like that.
Absolutely. For purposes of Asian American Island Heritage Month, what does that mean to each of you?
I'll start.
Yep, please.
So having a month celebrating heritage, it's newer to me. But I think and I don't mean to sound cliche, but every time I see a success or a young attorney who's of Asian heritage, when I swear in attorneys, it's just, there's so much pride, and just kind of being a cheerleader to Asians. Just growing up, I'm kind of switching gears, but I think of all the books that I've read over the years that involve Asian heritage, Joy Luck Club, All the Missing Heart, just so many of them. But I wish there was more promotion of that. I need to go share some of these books with people. It just seeing the hardships and the challenges and the victories that people of similar backgrounds have. I mean, I just love that. But also seeing, especially after COVID and the pandemic, it's really a time to give pride and to realize that racism and discrimination of any sort is not acceptable.
Yes, very important, very true. Judge Beamer, AAPI month?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I saw some billboards that had names of famous Asian folks, and some of them I knew, and I was on I-4, and some of them I knew, others I didn't know. And so I got to Google them, and that was, really interesting. Also, my kids, in particular, my oldest, Grace, she's 7, and she came home, she's like, we have a month, we have a month. And so she's excited to share. And also, I think last year for the Asian Heritage Month, somebody showed me or told me about this book, Pachinko, and it really is,
Really good.
yeah, it's great. And it's about, a family going through the different generations through the Korean War and everything. And I read it, and I was just, it really moved me. So I told my parents, and my mom started reading. She's like, I know all of this. I lived this. This was my mom's tale. This was my grandmother's tale. I don't need to read this book because we lived it, or our family lived it. So I just thought that was so interesting. But I love sharing the different cultures and talking about it with my kids. It's not just Korea. There's so many other Asian countries and Asian cultures that they can learn. And it just helps them broaden their understanding that everybody's different and everyone comes from different places.
Yep. Judge Robson, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so they did make a series out of Pachinko. I don't know if you saw that, Judge Beamer.
I haven't
It's
seen it
actually
yet.
really
I'll have
good.
to watch
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's good. And I felt like watching it, like that was the experience I heard so much about from family members and the like. So what I would say is the only thing I would add to what everyone's already said is it's just a nice time to reflect and appreciate, different cultures and different experiences. And it's actually really nice to get together with the other Asian folks here to talk about our common experiences.
Judge Chiu, last but not least, how do you feel about having AAPI month, and what does it mean to you?
I think it's, I never really had an appreciation for what it meant to, of sort of my Asianness, I guess, to some degree. I think until I took the bench, and because I spent 12 years in the Department of Justice, and you're just sort of in your own world, and you don't really think about it. And I'm sure it was, and I think part of it is like I talked about with my dad. It's like you just don't worry about the thing that's not right in front of you to worry about. And taking the bench and really starting to get plugged into the legal community at large, as well as the overall community, and seeing how much representation matters for for Asian people, that I think that really has, and I think in the last several years, that not only has that sort of been awakened for me, but I think for a lot of other people as well. And I think the idea is that people realize that we're here and we're visible. I think growing up, I always maybe felt like that. Maybe that wasn't the case.
Yes. Well, all very good perspectives and information, a little bit of fun we had here today, finding out little personal tidbits as well as professional. I'm going to turn over the panel now to one of our members, Stephen Chong, who will be fielding participant questions for our panel. So thank you all. Steve, I think you're still on mute.
Thanks, Jessica. So if you're in the audience and you'd like to submit a question to the panel, put that in the question and answer or the chat box, and then I will ask the judges that question. But to start us off while you're considering doing that, let me ask any of the judges if they have a personal story of overcoming an obstacle or adversity and how that incident helped you grow as a person.
I had an incident a couple of years ago when during COVID, and I think it was one of very limited experiences as a lawyer or as a judge of racism, where there was a defendant online and he was tired of waiting. And I hate to be blunt, but it says this in the contempt order. He called me a fucking Asian whore. And I think if you called me a whore, I would have been, but I just, as a female, I was upset. As an Asian, I was upset. But I remember not reacting because there's no reaction. I ended up having contempt hearings down the line, but I just felt so isolated and like, how do I handle this? So of course I turned to some of my mentors, but as a fellow jurist, I turned to Judge Beamer, and I think I handled the hearing very well, the contempt hearing, but it was at a time that really scared me. It scared me for my parents who are now older, and my children, because it was also, the timing was just very bad. Because of COVID, there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment, and it scared me. And I'm glad I had a mentor, Denise Beamer, to talk me through this and to kind of talk me off the ledge. And it was no longer a legal issue. It was more emotional because my mind started going to other places with how much regression we had, and how I just thought there was so much progress, but to hear it, it almost made me feel like a child. And the first time somebody, picked on me because of my ethnicity, it brought me back there once I got off the bench. So I think that was it was an obstacle and a challenge. And I'm just so grateful that I had the support of not just Judge Beamer, but other judges who had heard about it and who had kind of talked me down and made me realize everything was going to be okay. But what I do want to add is I was very grounded during the contempt hearing, but when this particular defendant started acting up with my court staff, there's this Asian stereotype of being a tiger mom. My court staff, my deputies, and the way he was swearing at them and bawling up, and that was when the second contempt hearing started, and that's another story. But just how protective I am, and it kind of goes into that stereotype over the people I love and care about.
Thank you. Anybody else have a story they want to share?
I served in criminal, and the case is over, the appeal is done, but it was a sexual battery case, and the defendant was Asian. He looked like he would be part of my friend group. He had no prior history, and it was alleged that he had molested his stepdaughters. Well, he was ultimately convicted, and we're in the sentencing phase, and his mother gets on the stand and she's begging me to be lenient, and she looks like my mom. His father gets on the stand, he looks like my dad, and he is begging me. His whole family and everybody was Asian. And I just remember during the sentencing, and the charge he was sentenced for is automatic life in prison. So even if I wanted to decrease the sentence, I don't have that discretion. So I really could do nothing. But I just remember just wanting to cry because everyone in the room looked like a family gathering and everybody was in such pain because of what happened. And I just remember that, you know, I can't start crying, you know, during this penalty phase. We're supposed to be somewhat stoic in those scenarios. So that was just a huge challenge. I still remember it. I don't think I'll ever forget that. And that was really difficult, but you know, ultimately it was over, but that was really hard.
Thank you. All right, we've got some questions. One is, what advice would you give to young Asian American Pacific Islander professionals? What kind of advice would you give them?
So I would say, based upon what everyone else has already said during this, is find a mentor, whether it's someone who's, you know, another law student, a professor, a practitioner, a business person, whatever it is, someone that you can talk to about the things that you're going through, the goals you want to achieve, and, you know, someone to support you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any advice?
I mean, I think what I would say is twofold. It's number one is that you will never exceed the expectations you have for yourself. So if, you know, whatever the goal is that you have for yourself, you're never gonna, the world's not gonna value more than you value yourself. They're not gonna upgrade the price on you. And, you know, I think a lot of times culturally, we have learned sort of the idea of like, we work hard and then we're recognized and we move up the chain. And, you know, that's not necessarily always how it works. And I think that can be a limiting factor in our growth. I think the second thing is that I would encourage everybody to make their friends before they need them. You know, one thing that I think historically, you know, that has been a disadvantage, I think, for people, you know, for Asian folks in the workforce, is that we sometimes we focus on performance rather than, you know, relationships, and, you know, those relationships are ultimately oftentimes the difference between advancement and just staying in place.
Another question is, what can we collectively do to increase Asian American representation in government?
I think by even being on this panel and having these outreach and events, and as Judge Chiu had said, just being present and being a leader, just our actions are going to lead the way for somebody else. I'm raising I have two adult children, and since I've been on the bench now for more than a decade, it's something that my kids have grown up with. But their friends and their peers just think it's so cool that, you know, they're having dinner with the judge and here I am serving up food. But just to be friendly, to be down to earth, to be true to yourself and who you are. And that just kind of leads into people gravitating towards you and introducing people in the profession, to this profession and to other professions. I know I've referenced it already, but with canvassing board, you know, Jessica said, you know, she's so glad that that they have an Asian representing the canvassing board, and it just didn't occur to me because I'm doing my job. I'm just doing the best I can, and I'm who I am. And I'm so proud that I have this Asian heritage and other people are aware of it. And what may not be a first impression to me, may be a first impression to others. So just go out there and do your best. And sometimes your best is being able to say no because you can't put your best foot forward or it's not the right time.
I just put in a quick plug. So on June 16th, I think that's a Friday, all of the judges on this panel will be doing a courthouse tour for students, law students, high school students. So please spread the word, bring them. They'll be able to sit on the bench, try on the robe, look at the courtroom, go into the jury deliberation room. I mean, that exposure, I think, to perhaps a student can make lifelong changes. I mean, I know that I would have remembered sitting on a bench trying on the robe if I was a law student or a high school student. So I think that's one part, is just being involved in these activities and for the next generation and raising them up to know that this is possible, that there are people here. And also in government, I mean, government is so broad and wide, elected positions, there are a lot of elected positions. And if you want to, raise the profile of Asian Americans, running for an elected position is one way also. Campaigns are difficult and they are hard and they are tough, but I think even seeing an Asian American candidate is moving that point forward as well.
Well,
And
thank
that's
you.
similar, that's similar to what I was going to say, which is the more we're out there talking about what we do, how we enjoy it, and that it's a good field to get into, whether it's judiciary, law, or something else, will help broaden the base.
Well, thank you all, judges, for your public service and your participation today. We are at the end of the hour, so I want to thank you for participating. And you already have stated that you don't often realize how your life and words will influence others and inspire others. So we thank you that you've given of your time and your energy into your profession and into participating today. And thanks to BMD for their support and sponsorship of the diversity initiatives that raise awareness within the firm and the greater legal community. And so we thank you as attendees as well. If we didn't get to your question, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to see one of these judges in the future and maybe ask your question at that time. But we thank you for participating today.